In the past, protected by its mountain barriers, Afghanistan, traditionally, has been an independent and non-aligned state. But for generations, Russian rulers, whether Tsarist or communist, have cast envious eyes upon it. The Afghan communists call themselves the PDP, the People's Democratic Party, but they were not elected by democratic means. Instead, with the backing of Afghan army units trained by the Russians, in April 1978, they overthrew the Republican government of President Dawood in a military coup and imposed a communist regime on the country by force. But from the outset, the new Marxist rulers of Afghanistan were split by bitter internal feuds. In September 1979, 9 months after signing a treaty of friendship with the Soviet Union, the first communist president of Afghanistan, Mohammad Taraki, was killed in a power struggle with his own prime minister, Hafizullah Amin. Amin took over as president. But by the winter of 1979, it was plain to everyone, including the Russians, that if the Afghans were left to settle their own affairs, they would soon overthrow the communists and replace them with a new government that would reflect the wishes of the people. So, in December 1979, fearing the communist regime would fall, the Russians invaded. The Soviet army seized the main cities, while thousands of so-called advisors flooded into the country to take over control of the government. Soviet troops surrounded the palace in Kabul, and hours later, President Amin was killed. The Soviet leaders decided to replace him as president with Babrak Karmal, leader of the rival Podium faction of the PDP, who until then had been in exile. Although nominally the new ruler of the country, Karmal is totally dependent on Soviet military backing to keep him in power, and in effect the Russians control the Afghan army and the civil administration. This point was confirmed by the chief Afghan representative at the UNESCO conference held in Belgrade in October 1980, who spoke out against the Karmal regime and condemned the Soviet occupation. Later, at Frankfurt Airport, he spoke to reporters.
General conference held in Belgrade. The reason that I did the speech was that Soviet Union is not helping Afghanistan. Just they are pretexting only. They are saying that we are helping Afghanistan, they should not be attacked by foreign countries. But in the same time, they are trying to dominate our country by this pretext. This was the reason I made this speech. I'm not alone making this speech. Ministers or the head of the government. This is just only by name. You see, everything is controlled in Afghanistan by Soviet Union. Even Khalq Party, even Podium Party, and all other party of Afghanistan will support my speech. Probably the president of the government will support me, but he cannot do something. He's under the confine of the Soviet Union, so nobody knows. Probably himself will support me, but probably he doesn't have the chance to speak like me.
Mr. President,
World Opinion did have the chance to speak once again at the United Nations.
To introduce the draft resolution which has been co-sponsored by 40 Islamic and non-aligned member states.
The General Assembly had already condemned the Soviet intervention in January 1980. Now, in a second special debate in November, speaker after speaker called for the withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan and for the right of the people to determine their own future.
If the Soviet Union, which calls itself the natural ally and reliable friend of the non-aligned countries, wishes to redeem its shattered credibility, it should pay heed to the voice of the Third World and cooperate with the Secretary General in the implementation of this draft resolution.
May I ask those in favor of the draft resolution before us to signify?
An overwhelming majority of 111 countries voted for the immediate withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan. an even larger majority than in the January debate.
The draft resolution is adopted.
Following the vote, the Soviet representative was asked if Russian troops would now withdraw from Afghanistan.
No, certainly not. We have stated very clearly that we regard discussion of this item in the General Assembly as interference in Afghanistan's internal affairs, and I stated, as did the Foreign Minister of Afghanistan, that this resolution is not accepted by us.
Is it true, as we have heard, that the Soviet Union, through its diplomatic corps, actually threatened and intimidated some countries in an effort to turn votes around?
We never threatened.